I want you to take a little moment and listen to the noble leaders speaking. Understand what they're speaking and comment in the section below. Let's watch.
So that we counter-check with what the executive is doing. Parliamentary Budget Office can lead this exercise, but if they need the expertise of other audit firms, including international reputable established institutions that can help us in this conversation, people who know about multilateral lending, Mr. Speaker, and going to the financial markets, because there are issues of Eurobond therein and other institutions that we have borrowed from, Mr. Speaker, let us have that conversation so that we know, first of all, Mr. Speaker, what is our debt exposure. Look at even the debt ceiling change of law that we did earlier. Makes sense. We argued and said we want to change how we calculate our debt status, Mr. Speaker, as opposed to having it as a static number, make it as a percentage of the GDP, because that's a more globally accepted standard. And that's fine. And I supported that motion, Mr. Speaker. And we said in 3 years' time, we want to bring our debt sustainability to 55% of the GDP. It is now at 61. We have 3 years. But what is the plan, Mr. Speaker? What did we learn from the past? How comes when you were passing that particular legislation, we didn't tie it so neatly so that we know? You know, bringing debt as a percentage to the GDP to 55% is not an occurrence, Mr. Speaker. It's not an event. It's a process. You have to grow down your fiscal deficit over the years. We didn't put it in law, Mr. Speaker. And it's not just enough for us to be satisfied and say that we have a promise that in 3 years' time that's where we'll be. At the time of exiting this conversation, Mr. Speaker, we must tighten that law so that even as those that do our budget at the Treasury know that the maximum fiscal deficit that we can get for this year 2024-2025 is this one. And you tighten it so that by you leave them with no option. So that by 2027, Mr. Speaker, when you're supposed to be at 55%, they have no option but to get there. But if we leave the law as it is, I can tell you for a fact that we will get to 2027, we will still be at 60, Mr. Speaker, or even more if we don't change. And we must make a decision, Mr. Speaker, as we sit and reflect, because debt has featured prominently in this conversation. As I move to conclude, Mr. Speaker, SRC, Salaries and Remuneration Commission, have been silent as this whole debate has been raging. Silence is not an option anymore, Mr. Speaker. They have to speak to the country. They have to tell us what is it that we're going to do so that we reduce our public expenditure on wages and salaries from 46% to the mandatory 35%, Mr. Speaker. If it means taking a pay cut, we as members of parliament, Mr. Speaker, good people, we have been told that it's not possible, that members of parliament will never do it. We don't have an option. We must do it, Mr. Speaker. The yearly increment that is now being discussed, that we are being told that, I saw that being reported or misreported in sections of the media, that we are now going to earn more. SRC continues to be silent about it, but we must make a resolution and say we reject even that one in light of the financial situation. But as it is, Mr. Speaker, as it is, Mr. Speaker, even if the high earners were to take a shave on their salary, that is still not enough. I don't have the statistics, and that's why I've said some of these constitutional commissions have failed us, Mr. Speaker. I don't know what would be the percentage of Kenyans say that earn over and above 100 and 150. But I'm certain, Mr. Speaker, they are in the slim minority of less than 10%. 90% of our public officers earn less than 100,000 and below, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, whatever savings that we can make there, let us make, but over and above, the thing that people don't like, Mr. Speaker. And this featured prominently. Senator Omogeni is out, but he knows this featured prominently in our NADCO talks. And a report that we tabled here, Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, which we haven't done with speed, Mr. Speaker, captured all the wastages that are in the public expenditure space and what we need to do as a country. From page 546 of the NADCO report, I think, to almost page 600, Mr. Speaker. Where things that we understand, things are tight. It's the most obvious thing that people do. Young people are telling us, when you have a job with Safaricom, you can live in Langata. But the day you lose that job, you move downwards to either to South Bio or Moja until things get better. That's what we are not able to do as the leadership. We know for a fact that when things were better, we could all fly business as members of parliament. But if you read the recommendation from NADCO, we have said any flight that is less than 3 to 4 hours, surely, must you fly business as a public official. 3 hours. You will not even sleep. You know? And so many things, Mr. Speaker, recurrent expenditure and wastages. Institutions, even parliament. And you know, I saw our staff criticize us and say, yes, we have been saying this or the other. But even our staffers, they need to know that this must come to them. You know, I've served as staff welfare chair, so I know a thing or two about expenditure in this institution. You will hardly get anybody in parliament, Mr. Speaker, on a Friday. Even to consider a report on something that happened in parliament, Mr. Speaker, people cannot consider it in parliament. It must be considered in Naivasha or Mombasa. As is the case in all our public institutions. We must lead by example, Mr. Speaker. And before we exit out of this motion today, we must give a blow-by-blow detail and say, what is it? What happens? Why is it that people cannot think in public offices on Fridays? That there must be somewhere in Naivasha, there must be somewhere in Kisumu, there must be elsewhere. Mr. Speaker, I don't think that there is any correlation between better consideration of a tender document or evaluation exercise that comes when you leave Nairobi, Mr. Speaker. These are extraordinary times, Mr. Speaker, and I must appreciate that there has been guidance, Mr. Speaker, and we are being reminded that because the finance bill has now been sent back via presidential memorandum and all clauses have been deleted. You know, that's a space that many people misunderstand, and sometimes we need to help people also appreciate parliamentary procedures. Number one, finance bill remains to be a bill. It's not an act of parliament, like many people have seen misreported in public spaces and says, oh, it takes effect on such and such a day. But as a sign of goodwill and trust, because trust has been completely eroded at this time, Mr. Speaker, I think the worst thing to do is for the National Assembly to come. The Budget and Finance Committee considers that recommendation immediately, Mr. Speaker, so that people are satisfied that that is behind us. But having done that, of more importance, the National Treasury must table the new budget estimates that captures, Mr. Speaker, the new reality. Less 3.9 trillion, less the 346 that was lost. And people must take a cut. In fact, my proposal, Mr. Speaker, it's a very simple exercise. 346 out of 3.9 trillion budget, Mr. Speaker, is 9%. At least at the national level, because I wouldn't wish that the same be applied to our counties. For counties, it must be on equity basis, Mr. Speaker. But on government, national government institutions, just do a pro rata cut. If your budget was 300 billion, Mr. Speaker, as an state department or an agency, you submit your new estimates less than 9%, so that you are left to go and do the reappropriation of whatever needs to be done. And by next week, Mr. Speaker, we have a new budget that captures that particular reality, because, like we are being reminded, living within our means is not an option anymore. And I believe that when our colleagues reconvene in the National Assembly, they'll be guiding us in that particular. But I have to be specific and say, because in the first instance, the distribution to counties was not pro rata, then the shave, I don't know what is being proposed, and we will wish to be reasoned, but it cannot be pro rata to counties, Mr. Speaker. We must, at the very least, I know it's not in my place, but at the very least, Mr. Speaker, counties should not get less than what they got last year. At the very least, Mr. Speaker. I know it's difficult, but somehow, someway, we must protect. Though, members, I don't know if you follow this conversation, even in our own county level, People have become more critical in budget making process. And they are beginning to ask our county governors, can you lay out your budget in public? So that we see also where is your confidential vote, like there was. You know, there are many budget lines that people don't follow. But now people are becoming more alive to reality of the budget making process in our counties. And we will speak later. I'm sure when colleagues speak, they will get time. I cannot say everything. To say on also the architecture of devolution, whether as is presently moving, Mr. Speaker, whether it can work. You know, Mr. Speaker, you are governor. Between 2013 and 2017, many young people, women and the vulnerable made a life out of doing business with counties. And there was spread of resources within. You know, in every village, you could see a young person and you'd be told so and so, he's a road contractor, he supplies this and the other, he trades with the county, and therefore people could begin to appreciate. These are things that were completely unknown to the country before the promulgation of a new constitution. Post 2017, there are no such people in our villages, Mr. Speaker. In fact, I have said on the floor of this house many times that unless the governor is your personal friend, or sometimes even unless he's your father, nobody can dare supply to our counties anymore. Nobody can dare trade with them. As protectors and custodians of devolution, Mr. Speaker, the House charged with the responsibility to make sure that devolution works in our county. Before we exit this motion, we must propose a way forward. If it means forcing our governors to first clear all the pending bills that have been found to be eligible, Mr. Speaker, before rolling out any new development, so that you give life at least to the many women and young people, Mr. Speaker, that have lost whatever little savings that they had by trading with counties, Mr. Speaker. We must pass that particular resolution today, Mr. Speaker. On the issue of police, I just want to speak to two final issues, then I conclude. I once said in a public forum, I was asking, where is the IG? That was in relation to the killings that were going on in Kerio Valley. It's been 2 weeks of protests, Mr. Speaker. Kenyans have lost their lives, others have been beaten, there have been challenges, police have faced also very difficult and hostile gangs on the streets. I am yet to hear the voice of the Inspector General. I am deeply troubled by that, Mr. Speaker. It cannot be right. We were in this country, though I was not a leader and I was a young person in university, Mr. Speaker, when we faced the post-election violence, day by day, General Hussein Mohammed will brief the country and speak to the country and give them an update of what is happening. How can we face such a crisis, Mr. Speaker? Up to this particular point, I don't know what the Inspector General thinks. I don't know what is the challenge. We don't know these things that are being discussed. Mr. Speaker, the question at the back of my mind, is this really the right man for this job? Mr. Speaker, we must think critically, finally, about Article 37. We have had conversations and debates here on this house, whether the demonstrations peaceful or not. How is it that we continue to struggle as a country with this thing of peaceful demonstrations? What is it that we are supposed to do? Can't we guide and provide the way forward so that people can know that if I want to peacefully demonstrate as expected of me, under rights guaranteed under my constitution, what is it that we are supposed to do? Because a new trend is emerging, and we have seen this, Mr. Speaker, where any time when you organize a demonstration, infiltration and separating between those that are peacefully protesting, Mr. Speaker, and those that want to take advantage of the environment and the climate that has been created is difficult to distinguish. And
the leadership of this nation, all the way from the top, is broken. There's no order. Now young people, young leaders are in parliament and trying to bring order in the nation. What does that tell you as a citizen? It tells you that the leaders who have been there have been misleading a nation. Yeah, and that is why there's high taxation, That's why there is inflation. That's why there is a very hard to live. People are finding it hard to live. And even farmers finding hard to sell their products. Not because they are wrong, but the system itself is self-centered. The leadership which has been there or which is there right now, you can see what the senators and the MPs are trying to discuss in Parliament and the Senate. You can really see that there has been a lot of rotten activities being done in the Parliament, in the government. So, as is it Aden Duale? The question is, does it mean that this is the only moment, the demonstration by the Gen Zs, is it now the moment that we are seeing that the president is now talking and minimizing things and correcting what has been happening in the office? Now this is the moment he has seen where the problems has been. Parliament and the Senate and the governors and all the leaders who have been in the office, does it mean that now this is the moment you have seen where the problems has been? Before you say you voted yes for the finance bill, did you understand the finance bill first of all? Did you understand where money was driven to? Did you understand the management of resources in the country? Did you understand that? So it tells us that we have reckless, we have uninformed leadership. And I tell you that the all kind of leadership is being wiped away. In the next 10 years, we will have fresh mind in the government, which is going to help the Kenyan economy to grow, going to represent the interest of the people, and at the end of the day, supporting growth within our means. And we mean it. Somebody say we need to live within our means. What does that mean? Walk the talk.